I had been wrestling with my thoughts for weeks, trying to process what had happened. Honestly, I'm still not sure if I've made complete sense of it, but I knew I had to share this. Maybe someone out there will understand, or at least tell me I wasn't crazy for walking away. My name's Matt, and I'm 31 years old. I work as an electrician. It's not the kind of job that gets you featured in Forbes or Hollywood blockbusters, but I love what I do. I've worked with my hands since I was a teenager, learning the trade from scratch. From juggling side gigs to afford tools, to spending grueling hours in a sweltering attic as an apprentice, I earned every ounce of skill I have. These days, I run my own small business. It's nothing flashy, but it's honest work, and I've built a good life from it. A nice truck, loyal clients, and enough savings to dream about buying my first house. For me, fixing something broken and watching it come back to life is deeply satisfying. But let's be real. In a world obsessed with fancy titles and corner offices, I've had to deal with my fair share of people looking down on me. You know the type. The ones who think real success involves spending half your life in a suit. Still, I never thought Lisa, my fiancée, was one of them. Lisa and I had been together for 4 years. She's 32, a corporate marketing professional who thrives in a world I don't fully understand. Lisa's driven, polished, and the kind of person who can plan our entire month down to the hour. She was ambitious, which I admired, but her confidence sometimes made me feel like the small-town handyman in her big city narrative. When we first got together, she said all the right things. She told me she loved my passion for my work, admired how good I was with my hands, and appreciated my work ethic. She even told me, "You're a real man," which felt good to hear, coming from someone as accomplished as her. But looking back now, I wonder, did she really mean it? Or was I just a novelty to her? Looking back, there were signs. Little things I ignored or laughed off at the time, but now they feel like puzzle pieces clicking into place. For example, one evening we were talking about future goals. I told Lisa I wanted to grow my business, maybe hire a couple of guys so I wouldn't have to handle every job myself. I was excited, you know? This was a big step for me. Lisa's response? "That's cute, babe. You'd be like a little boss." At the time, I laughed along with her. I told myself it was just a joke, but now it doesn't feel so innocent. The way she said it, like my ambitions were small or unimportant, left a sour taste in my mouth that I ignored. And then there was how she talked about her own career. Lisa would go on about how hard she had to fight to get where she was, how she had to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She was clearly proud of her accomplishments, and I respected the hell out of that. But when it came to my work, she didn't show the same interest. Not once did she ask about the long hours I'd put into building my reputation, or the months I spent struggling to make ends meet. Still, I figured we just expressed support in different ways. Lisa loved posting about her career and our relationship on social media, pictures of us with captions like, "So proud of my guy." Meanwhile, I was the kind of guy who'd show up to her work events, listen to her vent about her boss, or make sure dinner was ready when she got home late. I thought those quiet gestures were enough. Maybe I was wrong. Earlier this year, things shifted. Lisa got a big promotion, and suddenly her world revolved around networking and corporate events. She'd come home talking about her colleagues nonstop, this rising star, that powerhouse woman. When I asked why she didn't mention me, she brushed it off. "You're not part of that world, babe. It's not a big deal." It stung, but I let it go. I wanted to believe it wasn't personal. She was excited, and I didn't want to rain on her parade. Then the holiday party came up. Lisa talked about it for weeks, telling me it was important for me to go. "You'll love it," she said. "You'll get to see the world I live in." Honestly, I wasn't looking forward to it. I'm not a fan of corporate parties, but I figured if it mattered to her, I could suck it up for one night. So, I agreed. As the party got closer, Lisa was in full-on planning mode. She had everything down to a science: what we'd wear, when we'd arrive, even how I should answer questions about my work. "Just talk about your business," she said one night, casually scrolling through her phone. People love hearing about small businesses. I should have caught the undertone there, but I didn't. Instead, I told myself she was just trying to help me feel prepared. The night of the party, I put on the one good suit I owned. I'd bought it for weddings and other rare formal occasions, so it wasn't exactly Armani, but it fit well enough. Lisa, of course, looked stunning in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my tools for the month. She always knew how to carry herself, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride as I watched her glide around getting ready. When we got to the venue, though, that feeling quickly faded. The place was decked out with lights, expensive decorations, and a spread of food that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. Everyone there looked like they'd stepped straight out of a magazine: sharp suits, fancy dresses, and the kind of polished confidence that screamed corporate elite. Meanwhile, I felt like a fish out of water. Lisa, on the other hand, was completely in her element. She glided through the room, laughing and chatting like she was the star of the show. At first, I was proud of her. It was clear her colleagues respected her, and she handled herself with the kind of poise I'd always admired. But then the introduction started. "This is Matt, my fiancé," she'd say, her voice light and breezy. "He's an electrician, keeps everything running at home. If you ever need someone to fix your outlets, he's your guy." The first time she said it, I laughed awkwardly. The second time, I forced a smile. By the third, I realized this wasn't just a one-off joke. It was a pattern. Lisa wasn't introducing me as her partner. She was presenting me as a novelty, someone to laugh at. At one point, we were standing with a group of her colleagues, and a guy in a tailored suit, probably worth more than my truck, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could even answer, Lisa jumped in. "Oh, Matt's amazing with his hands," she said in a tone that made my skin crawl. "He's like my little handyman. Isn't that adorable?" Adorable. That word hit me like a slap in the face. The way she said it wasn't affectionate, it was patronizing. The group burst into laughter, and I stood there, smiling like a fool, even though I wanted to crawl under a table. I started tuning out after that. Lisa kept finding new ways to work me into conversations, each more condescending than the last. "He's my little wires and pliers guy," she joked at one point, laughing as if she'd just come up with the wittiest punchline ever. By the time the toast started, I was already mentally checked out. I stood there, nursing a drink and counting down the minutes until we could leave. Then Lisa stood up to give her toast. She started off fine, thanking her team, praising her boss, and cracking a few light jokes about office life. But then, out of nowhere, she turned her attention to me. "And, of course, I want to give a special shout-out to my fiancé, Matt," she said, grinning like she was about to deliver the punchline of the century. "He's not exactly a corporate guy, but if anyone's dishwasher stops working, he's your man." The room exploded with laughter. I froze. My face burned as 100 pairs of eyes turned to me, most of them amused, a few pitying. I glanced at Lisa, hoping she'd see how mortified I was, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She was soaking up the attention, smiling like she'd just won an award for funniest toast of the night. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Without a word, I walked outside into the cold, leaving the laughter and the humiliation behind. I stood outside in the cold, my breath clouding in the air as I tried to steady myself. My hands were shaking, not from the chill, but from anger, embarrassment, and a crushing sense of betrayal. The laughter from Lisa's toast still echoed in my head. I kept replaying her words over and over, each one cutting deeper. "Not exactly a corporate guy. Your man for a broken dishwasher?" How could she reduce everything I'd worked for into a cheap punchline? I stared out into the dark, trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. I thought we were a team, equals. But tonight felt like confirmation of something I'd been afraid to admit for a long time. Lisa didn't respect me. Maybe she never had. It wasn't long before I heard the click of heels behind me. I turned to see Lisa walking out, her arms crossed against the cold. She didn't look upset, though. If anything, she looked annoyed. "There you are," she said, her voice breezy, like I'd just wandered off for no reason. "Why'd you sneak out like that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "The toast," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. You turned me into a joke in front of your entire office. Lisa rolled her eyes, which only made my blood boil. Oh, come on, Matt, it was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny. Yeah, I shot back, because they don't know me. All they know is what you told them, that I'm some handyman who's lucky to have you. She sighed, like she was dealing with a child. You're overreacting. It wasn't that deep. I was just trying to lighten the mood. Lighten the mood? I could feel my fists clenching at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. Lisa, I've worked my ass off to get where I am. I run my own business. I make a good living. And you reduced all of that to a punchline. How do you think that makes me feel? Instead of apologizing or even trying to understand, Lisa crossed her arms and gave me a look like I was being unreasonable. I don't know why you're being so sensitive about this. It's not like I said anything untrue. You're an electrician. It's not exactly a glamorous job. Her words hit me like a gut punch. Wow, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. So that's how you really see me. Just some guy with a toolbox who's lucky to be with you? I didn't say that, she snapped, her tone defensive now. You're putting words in my mouth. That's exactly what you said, I countered, my voice steady but firm. And you've been saying it for a long time, Lisa. Maybe not in so many words, but in the way you talk to me, the way you talk about me, to your friends, your colleagues, even your parents. You've made it clear you don't respect me or what I do. Lisa's face hardened. You know what? Maybe I do think you're overreacting, and maybe you should consider why you're so defensive about your job. If you were really confident in yourself, you wouldn't let a little teasing bother you. That was it. That was the moment I realized we weren't just having an argument. This wasn't a misunderstanding we could work through. This was who Lisa was. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. You know what, Lisa? I can't do this anymore. Her eyes narrowed. Do what? This, I said, motioning between us. This relationship. I'm done. She stared at me, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. Then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh. You're kidding, right? You're really going to break up with me over a joke? It's not just the joke, I said firmly. It's everything. It's how you see me, how you've always seen me. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being treated like I'm less than you just because I don't work in an office. Her expression turned icy. Are you serious right now? Do you even realize how ridiculous you sound? You think you're so special because you run a little business fixing wires? Guess what? It's not that impressive. Her words stung, but they also solidified my decision. Without another word, I pulled the engagement ring off my finger and held it out to her. Good luck finding someone you actually respect, I said, my voice calm and steady. She stared at the ring like it was a foreign object, her face a mix of shock and fury. You're making a huge mistake, she said. No one else is going to put up with your fragile ego. I just shook my head. Maybe not, but at least I'll have my self-respect. And with that, I turned and walked back into the party to grab my coat, leaving Lisa standing there in the cold, with the ring still in her hand. Walking back into the party, I felt like 100 pairs of eyes were on me. People were whispering, exchanging glances, and trying to act like they weren't watching. Let them stare, I thought. Lisa had spent the entire night tearing me down, and I wasn't about to slink out of there like some humiliated puppy. I grabbed my coat, ignoring the low hum of conversation around me. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Lisa's voice behind me, sharp and biting. You're really doing this? Here? In front of everyone? I turned to face her one last time, locking eyes. You already did this, Lisa. I'm just finishing it. Her face flushed red with anger, and for a second, I thought she might try to say something else. But she didn't. I turned and walked out, letting the cold night air hit me like a splash of water. The days that followed were messy, to say the least. Lisa texted and called nonstop, alternating between, "Can we please talk?" and full-on rants about how I was overreacting and throwing away something good over a joke. I didn't respond to any of them. What was the point? By day 3, the mutual friends started chiming in. "Lisa says you freaked out over nothing," one friend texted. "She's making it sound like you stormed off because you couldn't handle a little teasing." Another friend sent me screenshots of Lisa's social media posts. She'd written some cryptic message about dodging a bullet and how some people can't handle a strong woman with a sense of humor. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "You're better off without him. Sounds like he was super insecure. Girl, you deserve someone on your level. Insecure." That word kept coming up, and every time I saw it, my jaw tightened. I wasn't insecure. I was tired. Tired of being belittled. Tired of being treated like I wasn't enough just because I didn't fit into Lisa's shiny corporate world. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from one of Lisa's co-workers. I barely knew her. She'd been at the party, but we hadn't spoken much. "Hey, I just wanted to reach out and say I'm sorry for laughing during Lisa's toast," she wrote. "Honestly, I've always thought the way she talks about you is weird. Like she's settling or something. I didn't realize how bad it was until that night. You didn't deserve that." Her message hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the toast. It was everything leading up to it. Lisa had been looking down on me for years, and I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see it. The more I thought about our relationship, the more obvious it became. There were so many little moments that at the time I'd brushed off as harmless, like the way she introduced me to her parents. "He's not your typical corporate guy, but he's great with his hands." Or the time she told her friends, "Yeah, he owns a business, but it's like small, not stressful like my job." I replayed those moments in my head, trying to understand how I'd let it slide for so long. The truth was, I thought we were partners. Equals. But to Lisa, I was just the guy with the toolbox, the one who'd never leave because he'd feel too lucky to have her. That realization hit home when Lisa's best friend Jen called me a week later. "Hey," she started, her voice hesitant. "I don't want to stir the pot, but I think you should know. Lisa's been telling people she settled for you because you'd be easy to control. She said she didn't think you'd ever leave because you'd feel lucky to have her." I didn't even feel angry when she said it. Just hollow. I thanked Jen for telling me and hung up, but her words stayed with me. This whole time, I thought I was building a life with someone who respected me, someone who saw me as her equal. But to Lisa, I was a safety net, someone she could show off when it suited her and belittle when it didn't. Once the dust settled, it was like I could finally breathe again. No more texts, no more calls, no more mutual friends trying to play mediator. Lisa went quiet, probably because she realized I wasn't coming back. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than ever. I upgraded my tools, expanded my client list, and started saving for that house I'd always dreamed of. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own ship, not trying to fit into someone else's version of success. I even sold the engagement ring. It wasn't a spiteful move, more practical than anything. I used the money to book a solo trip to the mountains, something I'd always wanted to do but never got around to because Lisa wasn't into rustic vacations. Sitting by a campfire under a blanket of stars, I realized how much of myself I'd compromised to make her happy. For years, I'd measured my worth against her standards, convincing myself that her world was more important, more valuable than mine. That wasn't going to happen anymore. The funny thing is, karma seemed to have its own plans. A few weeks after the breakup, I heard from a mutual friend that Lisa's antics at the party had come back to haunt her. Apparently, word got around the office about her behavior, and it didn't sit well with her boss. She'd been gunning for a promotion, but instead, she got passed over. "She's been really tense at work," the friend said, like snapping at people in meetings and acting paranoid. "I think she knows people are talking about her." I didn't take any joy in hearing that, but it felt like validation. Her need to tear others down, whether it was me or her colleagues, was finally catching up to her. Meanwhile, my life was looking brighter every day. I started teaching an evening class for aspiring electricians, sharing what I'd learned over the years. Watching people get excited about the trade reminded me why I loved it in the first place. I also reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during my time with Lisa. Looking back, I realized how much of my life I'd centered around her friends, her interests, her goals. Now, I was focusing on my own. As for Lisa, I haven't heard from her directly since the breakup. From what I've seen on social media, she's still posting cryptic quotes and playing the victim. That's fine by me. Let her spin the story however she wants. I know the truth, and so does anyone who is paying attention. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that respect isn't optional in a relationship. You can't truly love someone you don't respect, and you shouldn't try to stay with someone who doesn't respect you. So, to anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, trust your gut. If someone tears you down instead of lifting you up, let them go. It'll hurt at first, but you'll thank yourself later. Walking away from Lisa was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was also the best one. For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again. And if anyone ever needs an outlet rewired, you know who to call. Story 2. Sister insinuated paternity test on my child is the title of this narrative. I followed suit once she became pregnant, which led to her divorce. Hi there, everyone. I've started a new Reddit channel, which is significant news before we get into today's video. This time, the background isn't Minecraft. Instead, it has Subway Surfers with a seasonal Christmas motif. Take a look, subscribe, and get involved. The description contains links. I'll see you there. Let's begin the video now. Alright. I feel like I'm going to lose it, so I need to let it out. Although my 33-year-old sister Rachel has always been the family's troublemaker, last weekend she really went far. I'm Elise, a 35-year-old woman, and I've been married to Nate, a 38-year-old man, for 15 years. Max, who is 5 months old, and Layla, who is 3 feet, are our 2 children. And things had been quite quiet up until now. However, Rachel made the decision to make my dad's 70th birthday into her own circus. Let me tell you a little about Rachel's past. She is the kind of person that finds it quite difficult to be the focus of attention. For example, she would stop at nothing to regain the attention if it is on someone else. She was always the one who was loud, theatrical, and humorous as a child. However, she generally made fun of other people, and she has somehow managed to maintain that energy into adulthood. It was intended to be a large, joyous celebration of Dad's birthday. For weeks, Mom and I worked to make sure the guest list, cuisine, and decor were all perfect. Rachel, she offered no assistance at all. Not until the evening before did she even RSVP. Normal. The party day got off to a terrific start. There, we had a mix of close friends and relatives, and everyone was cheerful. My little talker, Max, was bouncing around informing everyone about his most recent scientific endeavor. He spent almost an hour discussing how he created a lava eruption at school since he is currently very enamored with volcanoes. Even the father, who often avoids having lengthy interactions with children, was completely captivated. Then, just as Dad was about to thank everyone for coming, Rachel, waltzed, came in. She arrived an hour late, but rather than entering covertly, she made a big splash. She had large sunglasses on her head, and her heels clicked, and this eye-catching scarf that seemed more appropriate for a runway show than a backyard gathering. The entire atmosphere changed. People halted their activities to gaze at her, and rather than saying he was sorry for being late, Dad hesitated in the middle of his sentence. "I apologize. I got caught up," she added, laughing. "You are aware of the situation." "No, we don't, Rachel." Everything seemed to have to revolve around her once she got there. Then she began to comment on the decorations. "I think it's cute, but a bit plain." Criticized the cuisine. The salad was in need of additional flavor, and it even joked that the music was Stone Age. But supper was when the real turmoil began. Everyone was speaking and enjoying the dinner while seated around the table. Being the sweetheart that he is, Max kept telling everyone about this wonderful dinosaur book he is reading. Everyone was listening and smiling because he was so eager and energetic. Everyone, of course, except Rachel. Evidently irritated that no one was focusing on her, she was rolling her eyes and glancing at her phone. After that, she made the utterly disastrous remark. In an exaggerated whisper that was loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, Rachel leaned over to her husband, Jake. The fact that Max doesn't resemble Nate is amusing, isn't it? Doesn't he resemble Alex in some ways? My former college boyfriend is named Alex. Our relationship ended a long time ago, although we dated for a few years. Of course, Nate is aware of Alex. The fact that Rachel brought him up in such a way in front of everyone isn't a huge secret. It was quite well planned. There was silence at the table. Nate's fork hung in midair as he froze. "What's that meant to imply, Rachel?" I blurted out as I felt my cheeks going heated. She gave a shrug. "Fake innocence. All of it." "Oh, nothing. I was kidding. Stop being too serious." However, the harm had already been done. Nate remained silent. His jaw was clenched as he gazed at his plate. Everyone began whispering to one another as my dad made an embarrassing attempt to shift the topic. Meanwhile, Rachel appeared ecstatic. The remainder of the meal was a haze. I was so furious that I was unable to even taste my dinner. Whenever I looked at Nate, he was silent. I could tell he was doing something with Rachel, even if his expression was blank. As if nothing had occurred, she was talking and laughing. I drew her away after supper. "What's wrong with you?" I gave a hiss. She gave me a look that suggested I was exaggerating. "What? It was only a joke." "No, it wasn't. I lost my temper. You are well aware of what you were doing. In front of Nate? Why would you say anything like that?" "In public." Rachel gave an eye roll. "Oh, please. Why are you being so protective if it's not true? You're behaving as though I made a charge against you. In a sense, you did." I fired back. "You just hinted that my son could not belong to Nate. How painful is that? Do you even realize?" However, she only grinned. "Calm down, Alex. You're exaggerating the situation." I realized then that there was no way to reach her. Rachel doesn't say she's sorry. She refuses to acknowledge her error. She only incites conflict and observes the results as if they were her own reality show. I left the party early with Nate. Even though I felt terrible saying goodbye to Dad, I was unable to remain another minute. We ran after I snatched Max and Layla. There was no sound at all on the drive home. I kept looking at Nate in the hopes that he would say anything at all, but all he did was gaze out the window. After we went home and put the kids to bed, I wanted to yell. When I did ask, "Do you think she's real?" he took a while to respond. "Of course not," he responded in the end. "But why not simply prove her wrong with a paternity test if it's that absurd?" My heart sank as I gazed at him. "Are you serious? Do you believe I have something to prove? Isn't that even true?" His body moved uneasily. "Elise, I have faith in you. However, Rachel is cunning. What if there is nothing? I lost my temper. I'm the one you should trust, not her." We didn't settle anything before going to bed. I had trouble falling asleep. I felt as though everything had changed as I lay there looking at the ceiling. I could sense the uncertainty that Rachel had sown developing. I hoped that the tension from the previous night would miraculously vanish when I woke up the next morning. Naturally, though, it didn't. Max and Layla were in the kitchen with Nate, who had already risen. While the children were chatting about pancakes, Nate remained remarkably silent. He was still waking up quietly, but not as usual. Since Rachel's foolish remark at the party, there had been a thick, uncomfortable stillness. The elephant in the room was difficult to ignore, but I forced myself to seem normal while I poured myself some coffee. I could see the wheels moving in Nate's brain, even though he was smiling at Max's small jokes and playing along with him. I was aware that he was still considering it. I was going wild about it. I was aware of the reality. I had nothing to conceal. However, Rachel's remarks had caused harm. I was unable to reverse the absurd notion she had ingrained in Nate's mind. I eventually brought it up later that day, after the children had gone down for naps. "Are we going to discuss it then?" I tried to sound calm as I asked, but I was everything but. With a groan, Nate combed through his hair. "Discuss what?" he said, as if he had no idea what I was talking about. "What do you know?" I mentioned Rachel's comment. "Since then, you've been acting strangely." He avoided making eye contact as he reclined on the couch. "Elise, I told you I trusted you." After a lengthy silence, he said, "Do you?" "It doesn't feel like it," so I pressed. "Since yesterday night, you have seldom spoken to me." I could see the turmoil in his eyes as he finally turned to face me. He said, It's not that I don't trust you. However, Rachel has always been cunning. What if she is aware of something that we are not? I was slapped across the face by it. What exactly are you discussing? Rachel doesn't know anything, I yelled. She was only creating drama, like she often does. Nate took a while to answer. He said when he did at last, "Why not do a test and settle this, in my opinion, if it isn't true?" I claimed that I shouldn't have to prove anything to you, so I was shocked by what I was hearing. Max is Nate, your son. The narrative is over. Either you believe me or you don't. The fact that he remained silent was more powerful than any argument we could have made. It was tight for the remainder of the day. We made an effort to maintain the children's lives as normal as possible, but it was obvious that something was wrong. At one point, Max even questioned me. Being the perceptive youngster that he is, "Are you upset with Daddy, Mommy?" I was angry, even though I assured him I wasn't. The tension reached an intolerable level by the conclusion of the weekend. He was still thinking about Nate. I detested it. Our marriage had always been strong, but I wasn't sure how to mend the damage caused by Rachel's remark. The worst thing was that I was also unable to quit thinking about it. I felt that Rachel's statements were so harsh, not because I thought they were true. There was nothing wrong with me, and yet I found myself enmeshed in the catastrophe she had made. The fact that Nate became aloof didn't help either. He wasn't blaming me directly, but every time we had a small argument over what to prepare for supper, or whether Max should watch another episode of his favorite program, there was this strange tension between us that wouldn't go away. We had the impression that something unsaid was looming above us. Then there was Rachel. It wasn't unexpected that she hadn't been in touch since the party. She most likely believed she had completed her task and could relax while observing the mayhem. That is Rachel's problem. She enjoys stirring things up, but she never stays to handle the fallout. The day after the celebration, however, my mother called to see how I was doing. She wanted to make sure everything was well after noticing that we departed early. "We're all right," I said, a falsehood. "Simply exhausted." Mom hesitated as if she wasn't convinced. "You are aware that Rachel's statement was meaningless?" I said. She said. It nearly made me chuckle. By that, I meant nothing. Mom, in front of the whole family, she essentially hinted that Max isn't Nate's child. Mom sighed. She was only kidding. You are aware of Rachel's personality. She talks without giving it any thought. I answered, that's not an excuse. She was well aware of her actions. Well, Mom responded after a prolonged silence. She gets, most likely, she simply felt excluded. Max presumably wanted some attention because everyone was swooning over him. I answered, yeah, maybe, and hung up the phone since I didn't have the energy to dispute with her. But I was fuming within. Rachel was not excluded. She wasn't just a naive child trying to get attention. She was an adult who made a conscious effort to cause trouble for my family. She had also been successful. The next few days were difficult. Even though Nate and I weren't actively arguing, there was tension in everything we did. He was clearly still considering Rachel's remark every time I glanced at him. Even if he refused to acknowledge it, I had reached my breaking point by the end of the week. I was not sure what had to give, but something had to give. All I knew was that Rachel had sown a seed of doubt, and it was spreading like a weed, threatening to suffocate all Nate and I had worked so hard to create. Since everything still feels unreal, I'm not really sure where to begin with this section. I never imagined that my marriage would reach this point. It seemed like a slap in the face to consider taking a paternity test for our baby, Max, who is my son. However, the stress at home was increasing, and I was at a loss for what to do. Although Nate wasn't directly accusing me of anything, his actions were clear. I detested it when he seemed aloof, as if he were emotionally tuning out. He wasn't particularly cruel or frigid. He was still going about his daily business, assisting with the children. However, I was unable to tear down the wall that separated us. Additionally, every time I attempted to discuss it with him, it only made it worse. I trust you, I said. Actions speak louder than words, he repeated, yet his deeds betrayed his words. I saw that he was gazing at Max more intently than normal, as if he was trying to find evidence. I once discovered him browsing through old photo albums, examining images from Max's early years. Is there anything in there that will make you instantly believe he's your son? One day, I lost it. Nate gave me a shocked look. I'm simply browsing at pictures, Elise. Calm down. Do not tell me to calm down. My voice trembled as I spoke. Ever since Rachel's big mouth opened, you've been strange. It's also unfair. Not to me. Not to Max, of course. Nate remarked, I'm not saying it's fair, but I can't just shut off my thoughts. All right. That was his justification each time he was unable to avoid it. It seemed as though he wasn't even trying, but perhaps he couldn't. My spouse, whom I had trusted with my life for more than 10 years, was suddenly doubting my moral character, and I was trapped in this nightmare. Max, meantime, was beginning to sense the strain. He is a bright youngster who can sense when anything is wrong. He began to ask additional questions, such as why Daddy always seems so solemn. Or, are you and your father at odds with one another? It was heartbreaking, but I would always comfort him. He didn't have to cope with this. He was entitled to a loving, contented household. Not whatever this stuff was. One evening following another dispute was the tipping point. It was hardly even a major altercation. Something foolish was the first thing that happened, such as what to have for supper. However, it swiftly grew into something more significant. I'm not sure how long I can continue living this way. When I eventually threw up my hands, I exclaimed, You want me to do what? For the first time, Nate's voice rose as he asked, Act as though Rachel didn't say anything. Act as though you don't have such doubts. Yes, I yelled. I want you to do just that since such doubts are absurd and causing harm to our family. Nate gave a headshake. You claim they're absurd all the time. Why not take the test, though, if that's the case? Why should we prove it if it's all nonsense? What I was hearing was unbelievable. The damage, Nate. That means you're forcing me to prove something I shouldn't. You don't realize what a humiliating thing that is? How offensive. He didn't respond, simply gazed at me with the same ambivalent look I'd seen for days. I knew then that he was not going to let this go. He wouldn't be content until he got evidence, regardless of how much I battled with him or how many times I told him he was mistaken. I decided on the morning after, Nate was no longer the focus. It has to do with Max. I have to stop allowing this stress to develop, not when our children were beginning to suffer from it. Okay, if completing the pointless test will restore harmony to our house, I would. When I informed Nate. To be honest, it stung more than anything that he appeared relieved. He didn't say sorry. He didn't mention that he had changed his mind. He just remarked, I think it's for the best, and nodded. For the finest. Yes, of course. The procedure itself was simple. Max, Nate, and I went to a clinic where they swabbed our cheeks. I felt worse because Max thought it was some sort of entertaining science experiment. He was unaware of the whole situation, and I hoped he would never learn. It was painful to wait for the findings. Even though it was only a few days, it seemed to go on forever. I always felt a surge of anguish and rage when I glanced at Nate. How did we arrive here? How did my family and marriage end up this way? When the findings were eventually received, the envelope had been opened by me. I unfurled the paper with trembling hands while Nate sat across from me, looking anxious. And there it was, a 99.9% match in black and white. I had always known that Max was Nate's son. Without saying anything, I gave Nate the paper. After reading it, he glanced up at me with a guilty expression on his face. I apologize, he replied softly. Apologies. My voice was little more than a whisper when I spoke. Are you sorry? I was wrong to distrust you. Oh, he said. I shouldn't have allowed Rachel to influence my thoughts. I wanted to scream at him and tell him how badly I had been wounded, but I was unable to do so. I was too worn out. All I could do was sit there in quiet since the conflict had exhausted me. Nate made an effort to compensate me throughout the course of the following several days. He repeatedly expressed regret and vowed to never again let Rachel's remarks to affect him. However, the harm had already been done. I was unable to look at him in the same manner. Not quite yet. I informed my mother about the test when she called to check in. What did she say? At least Nate is aware of the reality now. The truth! I yelled out. Mom, the truth is still the same. The truth was always the case. Nothing was proven by the test. I was unaware of it beforehand. Mom made an effort to back off, but it was ineffective. She failed to understand. Nobody did. Aside from me, perhaps? Rachel had accomplished her goal. We almost fell apart because of the mistrust she had sowed in Nate's mind. And Rachel hadn't gotten in touch yet. Not a single phone call, not even a text, nothing. I considered addressing her and letting her know just how much harm she had caused. However, what was the purpose? Rachel is just concerned about herself. She would most likely dismiss it as a joke and laugh it off. It wasn't a joke, though. Neither to Nate nor to me. All of the events surrounding the paternity test were still bothering me. I came to the conclusion that I couldn't just let Rachel leave this situation unharmed. Her repulsive joke had nearly shattered our family's harmony and my marriage. Furthermore, it was obvious that she didn't care because she hadn't even apologized. I thus took the sensible, if perhaps petty, course of action. I dug. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was searching for. All I wanted was to locate something, anything the world could see. Rachel loved to act as though she was flawless, but she was not. Throughout her life, Rachel has been an avid user of social media. She has a ton of well-chosen pictures of her life on Instagram. Elegant brunches. Take a vacation? Selfies in the gym? The process. However, when I browsed through her stream, I saw something strange for someone who spends so much time flaunting themselves. She and her husband, Jake, were hardly featured in any pictures. Wondering. I also looked at Jake's profile. He's more of a low-key man, so it wasn't unexpected that it was scant, but there was a strange feeling even there. It had been months since he last shared anything about Rachel or their life together. They appeared to be leading whole different lives on the internet. At that point, I began to believe that Rachel wouldn't have anything on her public Instagram if she was concealing something. She is not a moron. She is adept at maintaining appearances. I made the decision to search deeper. I made a phony Facebook profile. Nothing too clear. Just enough to get away with it and begin snooping around. I was intrigued by the 2 Facebook pages that Rachel had. Her primary account, which she hardly used anymore, was one of them. The other was an old account that she had reportedly stopped using. I was surprised when she accepted my friend request to her previous account. In a few hours, things became fascinating at that point. The first warning sign I anticipated seeing was the group she was in. The typical things: communities for exercise, mom groups, and perhaps some cooking advice. However, no. I was astounded to see how many secret groups Rachel was a part of, with articles like How to Keep Your Side Piece a Secret and Signs Your Husband is Starting to Suspect. One group was devoted to infidelity. My eyes were unbelievable. In these forums, Rachel was actively responding and offering tips like using a different name on dating apps and always having a backup plan. Ladies, it works, I promise. It was disgusting. She pretended that it was some sort of game while she was out here ruining her own marriage and almost destroying mine. But hold on, things get worse. I kept seeing the same name as I scrolled through her Facebook activities. Brandon. Although he wasn't on her list of friends, they were in the same groups and frequently interacted. I chose to look into it more, and sure enough, Rachel began sending Brandon private messages. Rachel was more than simply an internet cheater. She was a member of OnlyFans. When I initially discovered it, I couldn't believe it. I initially believed that this couldn't be Rachel. No way. There was no doubting it though as I browsed over her articles. It was everything. Her voice, her looks. It didn't take much detective work to figure out that she was using a false identity. Rachel posted more than simply explicit pictures. She was charging for private chats and personalized films, and she was creating quite sexual stuff. You know who was her biggest admirer? Brandon. I was blown away. While living a parallel life as some sort of OnlyFans celebrity, this woman had been acting like the ideal wife, causing turmoil in my life, and accusing me of adultery. I wasn't even sure what to do with all of this knowledge at this point. A part of me hesitated, and another part of me wanted to email it all to Jake immediately. Without knowing what to do next, I didn't want to ruin his world. When Rachel revealed she was pregnant, the situation became even more chaotic. She posted a photo of her ultrasound along with the statement, "Our little blessing is on the way," on Instagram, making a huge deal out of it. It couldn't have come at a worse time. For starters, Rachel and Jake had been unsuccessfully trying for a child for years. She used to constantly gripe about how unfair it was that some people were able to conceive so easily, while she was unable to. Everyone was ecstatic when she eventually revealed she was expecting, but I knew the truth, so I wasn't. Her texts to Brandon were visible to me. I had viewed the images, videos, and comments. Since there was a very real possibility that this kid wasn't Jake's, I knew Rachel was lying to everyone. I made the decision to wait to act until I had more proof. Using my fictitious account, I joined the infidelity groups and began communicating with Rachel and Brandon. I acted like a completely different person, seeking guidance on how to deal with an affair. Naturally, Rachel was more than willing to assist, offering me a wealth of advice on how to stay out of trouble. I discovered more about her connection with Brandon as a result of these discussions. Fans were the sole reason they had met, but things swiftly evolved into something more. For months, she had been seeing him face to face and slipping away while Jake was working or out of town. I was really struck by one of Brandon's messages. "I am very excited to meet our child. I'm hoping she resembles you. I was ill." Rachel wasn't only deceiving Jake. His child wasn't even his, yet she was preparing him to raise it. Not only that, but she was doing it guilt-free. I realized now that I needed to face her. I couldn't just stand by and let her get away with it. She had gone too far. However, I also intended to make her wriggle while I did it. She was worthy of experiencing even a little portion of the embarrassment she had brought upon me. I then began to make plans. I nearly choked on my coffee when my mom said that she was hosting a gender reveal party for Rachel. Rachel's party. It seemed like a slap in the face after all the shit she pulled. However, my mother was all about maintaining harmony and treating everyone fairly since she was my mother. "Elise," she began in her soothing voice as usual, "when you were expecting Max, we gave you a celebration. We should treat Rachel the same way." "Just?" I sneered. "It's not about fairness, Mom. She is a troublemaker and a liar, and you're throwing her a party as a reward." Mom sighed. "Rachel is family, even if I am aware of her imperfections. And perhaps this will soften her now that she's pregnant, assist her in maturing." "Mom," I wanted to shout. "She is actually leading 2 separate lives." However, I didn't. I wasn't prepared to share what I knew at that time. "Not quite yet. Rather," I said, "fine," while biting my tongue. "Enjoy your celebration. However, don't count on me to act as though nothing is wrong. At least you could come." Mom inquired, sounding worn out. I considered it. I didn't want to be close to Rachel, on the one hand. However, if she could make me look bad in front of the family, this was the ideal chance to confront her. Why was I unable to reciprocate? "Yes," I said. "I would come. But if she begins talking inanely, don't expect me to remain silent." Naturally, Rachel took advantage of the fact that the party was scheduled for the next weekend. She didn't stop posting about it on social media. I'm grateful for my family's support and am looking forward to celebrating our small miracle. When the day eventually came, it made me want to throw up. After putting on my game face, Nate and I went to my parents' place with the kids. Nate was acting appropriately since he was still attempting to mend our relationship following the paternity test controversy. I was grateful when he even stated, "Let's just get through this for your mom's sake." Rachel, the celebration was normal, excessive and attention-grabbing. There was a catered feast, a gigantic balloon arch, and pink and blue decorations all over the place. Wearing a flowing outfit that said, "Look at me," Rachel was in full princess mode, gliding about the room. Jake was also present, grinning and seeming thrilled, but I could sense that something wasn't quite right. He gave off the impression that he was only going through the motions. I questioned whether he had any suspicions or if Rachel had totally tricked him. I waited and watched in the background while the celebration continued. The constant focus on nursery decor and baby names was getting to Rachel. She would always respond to inquiries with this sickly sweet grin, as if she were the ideal mother. Then the big moment arrived. When the balloon burst, Rachel and Jake stood in the middle, clutching a large black balloon, and everyone crowded around them. There was pink confetti all over the place as they popped it. "It's a female!" Rachel let out a little shriek and clapped her hands. As everyone applauded and celebrated, I briefly felt sorry for what I was going to do. The enthusiasm subsided almost immediately, and people began to socialize once more. I recognized my opportunity. When I approached, Rachel was lapping up the praise from a group of pals. I yelled, "Rachel!" loud enough for everyone to hear. "Have you mentioned Brandon to Jake yet?" The talk ceased. For the first time in the day, Rachel's smile wavered, and she froze. "What are you discussing?" Her voice was strained as she said, "You understand exactly what I mean." I crossed my arms as I spoke. "Brandon is the person who has been purchasing your OnlyFans stuff and with whom you have been corresponding on Facebook. The man who may be your child's biological father." Rachel's face ran out of color. "You're crazy," she yelled. "This is something you made up." "Am I?" Taking out my phone, I said, "Her single fan account, her communications with Brandon, and even some of the most damning remarks she made in those cheating groups were all screenshots I had preserved." "Look at this," I replied, giving Jake my phone. After a brief pause, Jake picked up the phone and began looking through the screenshots. His face shifted from bewilderment to surprise to rage. At last he said, "Rachel." He spoke softly. "What on earth is this?" Rachel began to stutter, her hands fluttering as if she were attempting to snatch the words from the air. "It is," she said. "It's not what it looks like." Jake's voice rose as he replied, "It seems like you've been lying to me. By now, it appears that you have been unfaithful to me." Everyone in the gathering had become quiet. Everyone was observing their features with a mixture of dread and wonder. Rachel betrayed me, obviously in a panic. She spat, "You're such a jealous boss. Since the paternity test, you have been preoccupied with destroying my life." I didn't recoil. "You destroyed your own life, Rachel. I simply reveal the truth." The phone was tossed onto the closest table by Jake. Anger flushed his face. "Even so, is the baby mine?" He made a demand. "She's yours, of course." With tears running down her cheeks, Rachel yelled. After that, I would never submit to a paternity test. Jake cut me off. "Show it." Like a fish, Rachel's mouth expanded and closed. She glanced around the room as though someone may save her, but nobody did. Not even our mother, who had her hand over her lips and remained still in the corner. Finally, in a trembling voice, Rachel answered, "I don't need to prove anything to you." Jake chuckled bitterly. I had that thought. He slammed the door behind him as he turned and left. As the rest of us stood there in startled silence, Rachel fell onto a chair and began to cry. I anticipated that my mother would begin lecturing me about my inappropriate behavior throughout the party. However, she didn't. All she could do was look at Rachel. She had a disbelieving and disappointed look on her face. "Maybe we should go," Nate whispered softly as he approached me after a few minutes. "Yes," I answered in a firm voice. "We're probably done here." I couldn't help but feel relieved as we departed. After weeks, for the first time, it was as though a burden had been removed off my shoulders. Rachel has dedicated her whole life to dismantling others. However, following the gender reveal celebration, she would destroy herself this time. Rachel's situation worsened more quickly than I could have imagined. That evening, Jake departed from her and never returned. He went to stay with a buddy, apparently. Additionally, he informed my mother that he would not be entering that residence until Rachel had completed a paternity test when she called to see how he was doing. As usual, Rachel declined. She acted like Jake was the terrible guy for even asking, digging her heels in and playing the victim. "He has no right to mistrust me." She sobbed loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear her tell my mom over the phone. Her rejection, however, simply made matters worse. Jake was no fool. He had read the texts and seen the screenshots. He was aware that Rachel was not telling the whole truth. To be honest, everyone else did too. My parents were inconsolable. Despite Rachel's terrible behavior, they had always attempted to see the best in her. This, however, was a new low. One evening, my dad, who generally avoided family turmoil, sat her down and told her that she would lose her husband if she didn't take the exam. "Do you want it that way?" What did she say? "Perhaps I no longer desire him." That quickly silenced my dad. He was unsure of how to respond to it. To be honest, Nobody else did either. Rachel, however, continued to cling to her secret existence. However, fissures were beginning to appear. Rumors of the drama had begun to circulate around our extended family, and soon her OnlyFans account was discovered. I didn't need to speak. Another person discovered it and disseminated the URL. Rachel made an effort to deny it. It's not me, of course. Despite the fact that her face was absolutely covered with it, she said. This must have been manipulated to make me appear unflattering. Nobody purchased it. Then the final twist appeared. My mom contacted me the morning of Rachel's birth, which was a few months later. She spoke shakily. She said, "The baby is here." "All right," I said warily. "She also doesn't resemble Jake." Mom said softly, "Not by any means." It didn't surprise me. I knew that this time would arrive, therefore I had been waiting for it. Nevertheless, I felt a bit queasy when I heard it verified. "How will you respond?" I inquired. Mom let out a sigh. "I'm not sure. Jake still won't speak to Rachel, and she isn't willing to acknowledge anything. If she does not take the exam, he threatens he will file for divorce." I responded, "Good for him." Jake never wasted any time in carrying out his threat. He filed for divorce 1 week after the baby was delivered. As was to be expected, Rachel blamed me for everything. "You are solely to blame for this." One night she yelled on the phone, "None of this would have occurred if you hadn't interfered. If you hadn't lied, none of this would have occurred." I fired back. "For once in your life, consider accepting some responsibility." After that, she hung up on me, which I was okay with. I had spent enough of my energy on her. No sense. However, Rachel's games weren't over yet. She began telling everyone who would listen about me. She said that I had always been envious of her and was a vengeful beast. She even made an attempt to include Nate, saying he had always had feelings for her. That's why I was so keen to defeat her. In all honesty, that was hilarious. Everyone knew that Nate couldn't stand Rachel. She simply came out as more desperate when she tried to disparage me. When my mother overheard Rachel talking to Brandon on the phone, it was the final nail in the coffin. My mom, bless her, still couldn't bring herself to give up on Rachel, so she'd gone to her house to assist with the baby, and overheard Rachel in the other room conversing. "She is stunning, isn't she?" "But I hope she looks more like me than you," Rachel said. "I do not want suspicion to be aroused." My mother immediately approached her. "Is Brandon the father, Rachel?" Her voice trembled as she asked. After initially denying it, Rachel finally broke down. "All right. Indeed. All right. The father is Brandon. Are you content now? Cheers to the number." My mother was devastated. That evening, she called me and filled me in on everything, and I heard genuine wrath in her voice for the first time in years. Every word Mom uttered has been tarnished by her, our family, her marriage, and her reputation. I'm at a loss on what to do. "You're not accountable for her. Let her handle the disaster she created," I advised her, and that's precisely what took place. Jake severed all contact with Rachel and completed the divorce in a matter of months. As expected, Brandon had no desire to interact with her or the infant. Rachel found herself all alone. After much introspection, my parents also made the decision to take a back seat. For a short time, they provided her with financial support, but they eventually let go when it became evident that Rachel had no intention of changing. I have, for my part, moved on. Nate and I don't have a flawless marriage. Recovering fully from something like this is difficult. We're working on it, though. I feel like we're finally reestablishing the trust that Rachel worked so hard to undermine, now that we're attending couples therapy. In contrast, Rachel serves as a warning story. She spent so much effort discrediting others that she failed to recognize how she was hurting herself. Now that she is alone herself and trying to raise a child, she has no one else to blame except herself. That's just what she deserves, to be honest. 0, 28, 48, 22, 28 to 30, 10. Not sure Jake still won't speak to Rachel, and she isn't willing to acknowledge anything. If she does not take the exam, he threatens he will file for divorce. I responded, "Good for him." Jake never wasted any time in carrying out his threat. He filed for divorce 1 week after the baby was delivered. As was to be expected, Rachel blamed me for everything. You are solely to blame for this." One night she yelled on the phone, "None of this would have occurred if you hadn't interfered. If you hadn't lied, none of this would have occurred." I fired back. "For once in your life, consider accepting some responsibility." After that, she hung up on me, which I was okay with. I had spent enough of my energy on her. No sense. However, Rachel's games weren't over yet. She began telling everyone who would listen about me. She said that I had always been envious of her and was a vengeful beast. She even made an attempt to include Nate, saying he had always had feelings for her. That's why I was so keen to defeat her. In all honesty, that was hilarious. Everyone knew that Nate couldn't stand Rachel. She simply came out as more desperate when she tried to disparage me. When my mother overheard Rachel talking to Brandon on the phone, it was the final nail in the coffin. My mom, bless her, still couldn't bring herself to give up on Rachel, so she'd gone to her house to assist with the baby, and overheard Rachel in the other room conversing. "She is stunning, isn't she?" "But I hope she looks more like me than you," Rachel said. I do not want suspicion to be aroused. My mother immediately approached her. "Is Brandon the father, Rachel?" Her voice trembled as she asked. After initially denying it, Rachel finally broke down. "All right, indeed. All right. The father is Brandon. Are you content now? Cheers to the number." My mother was devastated. That evening, she called me and filled me in on everything, and I heard genuine wrath in her voice for the first time in years. Every word Mom uttered has been tarnished by her. Our family, her marriage, and her reputation. I'm at a loss on what to do. "You're not accountable for her. Let her handle the disaster she created," I advised her, and that's precisely what took place. Jake severed all contact with Rachel and completed the divorce in a matter of months. As expected, Brandon had no desire to interact with her or the infant. Rachel found herself all alone. After much introspection, my parents also made the decision to take a back seat. For a short time, they provided her with financial support, but they eventually let go when it became evident that Rachel had no intention of changing. I have, for my part, moved on. Nate and I don't have a flawless marriage. Recovering fully from something like this is difficult. We're working on it, though. I feel like we're finally re-establishing the trust that Rachel worked so hard to undermine now that we're attending couples therapy. In contrast, Rachel serves as a warning story. She spent so much effort discrediting others that she failed to recognize how she was hurting herself. Now that she is alone herself and trying to raise a child, she has no one else to blame except herself. That's just what she deserves, to be honest.